You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
Slavery is back.
Welcome to a place where private business profit from a captive labour force, yet pennies are spent on medical services to a population in which the Indigenous, the poor and the mentally ill are overrepresented. Where isolation, humiliation and degradation are facts of life. Welcome to prison.
It depends who's telling the story, I suppose. The prisoners would have one view, the people who work in the prison system would have another, and I think it's up to people to decide where the truth is.
Give government propaganda and the media spin doctors the flick. And check out Doin' Time for news, views and tunes on prison issues from Guantanamo Bay to Christmas Island to prisons and detention centres everywhere. Every Monday at 4 p.m. on your community radio 3CR.
We are still fired up and we're still talking about revolution.
Hello and welcome to the Doin' Time show. This is 3CR Community Radio, 855 AM on the dial, streaming live on www.3cr.org.au. This is Marisa and I'll be taking you through until 5 o'clock this evening. Today's show is dedicated to stopping Aboriginal deaths in custody, and it's also dedicated to looking at systemic racism in regards to Aboriginal people. It's approximately 4:02 and I'm still doing the show remotely from home as it's still the COVID-19 lockdown. And indeed, later on in the show, we will be speaking also about police powers and lockdown and how that has affected First Nations people and other vulnerable communities. But first up on the show, we'll be speaking with Latoya Rule, who's a very much loved guest on our show, and she's been on our show a few times now. Latoya, listeners may recall, Latoya is the brother of Wayne Fella Morrison, who died in custody, and we're going to be hearing from her shortly about that, and she'll be giving us an update not only on the inquest but also on a ridiculous and weird twist of fate, or should I say error, where a coroner was almost removed from the inquest. And I don't understand the whole logistics of it, and I don't think many people do really. There are many, many questions in regards to this Aboriginal death in custody and why guards haven't written incident reports and why haven't some of them been put forward as witnesses. So we'll be looking at that, and then after that we'll also be speaking with Tessa Theocharous, who is the principal solicitor and an accredited criminal law specialist. And she has her own practice, and we'll be speaking with her about the brother of Veronica Nelson. Veronica Nelson has recently died. She's an Aboriginal woman that died in custody at the Dame Phyllis Frost Centre. And this man, Dwayne Kennedy, was actually arrested when he shouldn't have been arrested. There were many errors in regards to his court case, and he was arrested sitting on a park bench, not far from home, and he had homelessness issues. Dwayne Kennedy has finally been freed after 2 bail applications by his lawyers that have been unsuccessful, forcing them to apply for an urgent Supreme Court bail hearing. In releasing Mr Kennedy, Victorian Supreme Court Judge Stephen Kay found that a string of errors led to the man's arrest and that he should never have been imprisoned. So we're going to be looking at that and systemic racism. Just wanted to give a very brief but comprehensive introduction before we speak to Latoya, and I'll be drawing your attention, the attention of listeners, about that shortly. So we'll be speaking with Latoya soon.
G'day, you mob. Kutcher Edwards here. I just want to send out a message to you all. To stop the spread of COVID-19, also known as the coronavirus, it is advised that you keep 1.5 metres away from each other. Follow rules on social gatherings. Wash your hands when appropriate and stay home if you're feeling sick or unwell. But most of all, keep strong, stay safe, and of course, keep listening to 3CR, community radio, to keep connected to the community. We'll get through this and hope to see you real soon. Bye.
And you're back with the Doing Time show. And we've got Latoya on the line. Hello, Latoya, welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Good. As well as can be expected in these really tough times, Latoya.
Yeah, for sure.
It's been a very difficult time for everyone, but in particular for vulnerable communities, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm just actually, believe it or not, having a conversation over Twitter right now with the South Australian Premier, Stephen Marshall, about what his plan is for, people in prisons here in South Australia. And so this pandemic, I guess, has opened up some doors of communication, which is great, but we still need to see outcomes and solid outcomes, so, yeah.
Absolutely. So let's have a look then, and it's really wonderful that you've been able to come on and speak about your brother, because it would be very painful, wouldn't it? But it's very difficult. But at the same time, it's good to get it out, isn't it?
Oh, it's been such a heavy week and a half or so now. But yeah, your show, particularly as I was saying before, has just been a method for me even to be able to be accountable to how I'm sharing information and how the community is getting this stuff out, because it does affect other cases. So yeah, while it is hard, I guess I just really thank you for continuing to bring voice to the issue.
We wouldn't be doing anything else, Latoya, but thank you so much. That's fantastic. So, first of all, could you just introduce yourself and tell us what land you're from and also what land your brother was from?
Yep. So I've lived on... my name's Latoya Rule. I'm a Wiradjuri Māori person who's lived on Kaurna land my entire life now. My brother's Wiradjuri, Gukuthu and Wirangu, my family from the far west coast of the place now known as South Australia. And yeah, he passed away in Yatala prison on the 26th of September 2016. And so it's been, coming up in this September to 4 years since his passing, and nearly 2 years since this coroner's court's been going on surrounding his death.
And he died in the Royal Adelaide Hospital, didn't he?
He did, yeah. He was on life support. Obviously, he, after the incident, people may have seen on the news of him being, quote-unquote, restrained by corrections officers in South Australia's prison, Yatala prison. He was taken to the Royal Adelaide Hospital and was there for almost 3 days on life support, but never regained consciousness. And, yeah, we turned off his machines in the morning at 3:40 a.m.
Indeed. And in the week before his death, Mr. Morrison had been taken into custody on remand, hadn't he? And due to overcrowding, he was held at the Golden Hill cells before being moved to Yatala Labour Prison, where he was waiting to appear in the Elizabeth Magistrates Court by video link.
Yeah, that's correct. I was told at the time that it was due to overcrowding. I mean, we're still yet to have anybody actually be accountable for that information.
Absolutely.
And accept it. But, yeah, that's what I was told at the time.
We never will know what actually happened, because it appears that, the guards were trying to give him some sort of resuscitation. I'd like to know why an ambulance wasn't called.
Yeah, that's an incredible point to make. obviously prison health is apparent in the prison, like they have access to those services. It's not as if, it wasn't a possibility. And their own practices of resuscitation were clearly not good enough. He was, dead essentially for 50 minutes before they were able to, keep him breathing or resuscitate him. But, that raises a lot of questions for me, if I'm honest, towards if he was actually alive or if it was a machine during the final moments of his life, actually keeping him looking and appearing as if he was alive, if you understand what I'm saying. Being with him in that space, it wasn't the same. It didn't feel like he was there at all. And if somebody's, clinically dead for 50 minutes, there's no coming back from that, and we know that he never did.
That's exactly right, Latoya, and in fact it appears that from the scanty information that we've been given, that there appeared to have been some type of incident that happened while he was being transported in the van. I think what I find quite strange is the fact that there was awareness among prison guards of the positional asphyxia. And so that listeners are aware, Latoya, perhaps we should explain it, shouldn't we, that this particular term, that positional asphyxia, and it's spelled ASPHYXIA, for people that aren't familiar with the medical terms, and it's a situation that occurs where a person is restrained in a way that leaves them unable to breathe. And it's a key issue in the currently suspended New South Wales inquest into the death of David Dungay. And you'd be familiar with David Dungay, where he died in a similar way.
Yeah, that's David Dungay.
Dungay, sorry.
And, that's okay. David is the son of Latoya Dungay, and that family is a really staunch family in New South Wales fighting this case. And David was in his cell eating biscuits. So it was, to my knowledge, he was diabetic. He was asked to stop. He refused to stop eating a biscuit, to my knowledge, and essentially he was suffocated by a few guards who pinned him down, and he was saying, "I can't breathe," very similar to what we know in the States with a lot of the black deaths there that are raised by black deaths in custody, this common element of "I can't breathe," and the correction said to him, "If you can talk, you can breathe."
Exactly.
He died. He died, and his last words were asking for assistance and for help.
That's right.
There's clear parts of these cases where, in our family members' final moments, they're actually asking for help. And for my brother's life, I will never know what were his final words. But I can tell you now that he submitted throughout the course of his time in lead up to the incident, medical forms that were never processed. We've heard evidence so far about that. He was asking for help. There's footage of him that I've seen that won't be released to the public of, really, really sad and depressing moments of some of his final moments with, a blanket over his head rocking back and forth. This was a day before the incident happened. Now, that tells me that, he needed help. And majority of the people who pass in custody, moments before they do so, they actually just need assistance and proper medical care and proper human care. And it's inhumane treatment that's been provided to them instead. That's the outcome of what happened.
Very inhumane, and the reason why I mentioned David, I wasn't trying to compare. I was just trying to talk about the fact that not only were they similar, but also that there was a quote from one of the guards here in an NITV article from September 2018, where the guard actually says, oh, well, this is in relation to your brother, where the guard says, oh, we deal with these situations from time to time and we're not sure whether they're faking it, he said.
Yeah. Firstly, no, I think we have to draw comparisons, so thank you for doing so. Like, I think that isolating any Aboriginal death in custody away from some, away from the truth behind the systemic injustice that's occurring is not the way to go. We have to be drawing comparisons because this is a structured and organised crime that's going on against Aboriginal peoples and has been doing so since colonisation. So they definitely are related. This idea of faking it. I mean, that I've done my own research in academia at university around this idea of, I actually looked at the case of Miss Dew in Western Australia who passed away in 2014 and thinking about, how she was treated and this idea that, Aboriginal people are not honest and not truthful about, the things that are happening to us. Yet when we pass away, we're blamed. We are blamed for our own deaths. We are blamed for, these underlying discourses that are inherently criminal, that are inherently, criminalise Aboriginal people. And so, as an Aboriginal person walking down the street, we're automatically targeted as being untrustworthy, as being dishonest, as hiding things that are not true. And that all relates back also to, cultural aspects that the coloniser cannot penetrate. And the unknown information that they so desperately want to know about Aboriginal people. And so, it's very systemic, it's very racist. And the idea that somebody could be fighting for life and crying out for help, which are, majority of the cases of Aboriginal deaths in custody, those individuals have done at the time of their death, and that being seen as a lie.
Exactly, and you'd be aware also that Miss Dew, the police and the health system were making out that Miss Dew was faking her symptoms right up until the point of her death. And she died from pneumonia and sepsis, And
in turn was given things like diazepam, which Wayne was also given, and to calm behaviour, for behavioural issues actually. Miss Dew was diagnosed, it says on her medical records, behavioural issues. Somebody's crying out to be essentially taken care of. I don't want to say saved because I don't think the colonial state can ever save us, or do we want that? But, crying out for medical attention, and she's got behavioural issues for doing so. Now, what does that speak to when Aboriginal people actually want help? Our behaviour of asking for help is deemed inappropriate. And that speaks to a whole lot of discourses around poverty, welfare, dependence. There's so many key parts of every Aboriginal death in case that actually stand outside that individual and more so about Aboriginality and how that's criminalised, despite who you are and despite what you've done. It's still an association to, being Aboriginal, being a person of colour, being black in Australia, being criminal because of that.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad we've been able to talk about the background and also to highlight other deaths in custody. So, Latoya, can you take us through the inquest? Obviously, the findings haven't been handed down, but I don't think there is any harm at all in talking about the inquest itself, about what happened. Could you just talk about some of the things that happened at inquest and also look at recently about why the coroner was almost taken off, so to speak? There are just so many issues here.
There are so many issues, and we're far from finished. Which is a positive and a negative thing at the same time. So essentially, every Aboriginal death in custody since the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Death in Custody, released in 1991, has immediately, essentially, I'm just trying to overcomplicate it.
That's okay.
Essentially, a coroner's court has to come from an Aboriginal death in custody.
That's right.
And every Aboriginal death in custody has one. Now, we know in history that many Aboriginal peoples who have passed in custody actually haven't had coroner's courts even passed, haven't had that kind of investigation even past those Royal Commission recommendations, and that's an injustice in itself. So when it comes to my brother's case, seeing things like the coroner being sent to the Supreme Court of South Australia to be kicked off the case, and for corrections officers and lawyers, over 19 plaintiffs, not, fighting so that they don't have to show up to give evidence at all in the coroner's court, and pleading what we call a penalty privilege against self-incrimination. That's a show of them, not wanting to even proceed with the findings from the Royal Commission into Aboriginal death in custody, and not wanting to proceed with, the fact that investigation should be carried through. They think that it's a non-issue. So all that work that happened between, 87 possibly, or 86 to 91,
87.
They're throwing that out. They're spitting in the face of every Aboriginal person and every non-Aboriginal ally who worked on those cases and actually cared about this enough for it to be sent, to the Human Rights Commission and to be a national issue. They're spitting in the face.
Oh, you're talking about the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody, aren't you?
Yeah.
The recommendations.
Those recommendations, So by drawing the issue of, going to a Supreme Court case to overthrow a coroner, that spits in the face of those recommendations and those people who worked on that Royal Commission, back in the day, and all the work they done, essentially, and saying that it's a non-issue today. And so, so far in the coroner's court, we've seen a number of corrections officers, health workers, corrections staff talk to. Majority that they've spoken to is things like the systems that, were identified, of how to identify a custody notification. So essentially, they call it a NOC, N-O-C, a notification of concern.
Yes.
And, all the technical issues around their systems about when those NOCs can be raised. And we've seen and heard from a few people in prisons. Some of them were Aboriginal who were in the same cell with Wayne, and some of their evidence we've heard. We're yet to hear from the 7 in the van. We're yet to hear from them and a few other key players, I guess, in this case. And so, to stall the process, I believe, they took it to the Supreme Court case. They said about the coroner, they put against the coroner that she was biased. So back in the day, a long time ago, the coroner actually represented the Union for Prisons. Now, funnily enough, they're saying almost on our behalf, corrections are saying almost on our behalf, that there's a bias there because she represented the Union. Now, prior to all of this happening in the Supreme Court case, have said we actually don't think that's a bias. It was a long time ago. None of the corrections officers or anybody in the case involved in Wayne's case were part of that process that she went through of representing corrections unions a long time ago, and we just want to proceed with the case. So essentially what they've done is almost acting, talking on our behalf by saying, no, we think that that's biased against ourselves. We're going to take it to the Supreme Court. Now, that's already an issue because they haven't listened to our voice as a family or what we want. They've used this tiny detail to try to overthrow the coroner and get her kicked off the case. Alongside that, they've also said, we don't think our 19 plaintiffs, or rather, the 7 corrections officers and the other corrections officers and health workers that are part of our 19 have to give any evidence. And in fact, that the evidence that they have given to date has been tampered with due to this bias that apparently exists, right? So it was, yeah. So they're trying to throw out the evidence that's already come up to this point, along with the future evidence completely. So the entire case, they were trying to say, is
discredit.
Yeah, is discredited and is biased and shouldn't, stand up at all.
As you've been talking with, go on.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, but this is good what you've said. It's that because you've explained it really well. Like you've actually explained how it's discredited and stalling. You use the word stalling there, Latoya. And is it fair to say that lawyers for the prison guards argue that they should be able to exercise privilege against self-exposure to a penalty, privilege against self-incrimination, and that the coroner's court was not entitled to look at what happened after Mr. Morrison was pulled from the van?
Precisely. Yeah,
is that right?
That's the key point. That's exactly the other point. There was a few points that they were making, and that was the main one. And actually, and not to jump too far ahead, but yeah, essentially we sat in for those 2 weeks. I think it was about 2 weeks or a week listening to that.
And when was that?
That was towards the end of last year, possibly November.
Okay, so that was 2018. In 2018, when it first started, they were doing that. The lawyers were doing that too, and they didn't succeed. Then last year again, I believe, in November, the end of November, early December, correct? It was just after Auntie Tanya's inquest, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because I remember I saw you in the coroner's court during Auntie Tanya's inquest, and you said that you were going to the inquest in December, I believe, or the end of November.
Yeah.
That was last year. And so they were again reopening those issues, weren't they, trying to get the coroner away from the case, right?
That's right, yeah.
So they were doing it again. So in effect, is it fair to say that they appealed Miss Baisha's decision in the South Australian Supreme Court, which found the Deputy Coroner did not deny penalty privilege or legal professional privilege to the prison guards, and there was no reasonable apprehension of bias?
That's right. So initially,
she won the case, basically.
I did forget that point. So initially did put it to her. They put it to her in the coroner's court and stopped the process then, and then we had to wait for her judgment to come by about what she would do, and she said, no, I don't think this bias is, important, essentially. I don't think it tarnishes the case, and then they did appeal that, and it's gone to the Supreme Court. Now, they can appeal it again. They can do that. It will go to another level within the Supreme Court, and then it can go to another level in what we call the High Court. And they can do that if they please, and in fact we're waiting to see what they will do if they do make a submission in that way, right? So this isn't finished again by any means. It's not that we just get a directions hearing and we go back and everything continues. We do have to wait for that, and I think they've got about another week until they come up with a submission for what they want to do.
That's crazy, Latoya. That's crazy. Like, in effect, what's happening is that the inquest findings and the whole inquest is being obstructed.
Yeah.
Isn't this an obstruction of justice?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like I was just having a look here at some of the things that they were saying, that the lawyers for the guards were saying in regards to this coroner or deputy coroner, and they tried to say that she had a previous association with the correctional officers legal fund, and it was in effect a conflict of interest. Luckily, that was ruled not true, or that was only slight.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, sorry, it wasn't the union; it was the legal fund, but essentially the same thing in my eyes, anyway.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, there's a saying about justice delayed is justice denied, and this is exactly what's been happening. Not only because the more time that goes on, essentially people forget, right? And it's very hard to have a reliable witness when there's quite an amount of time between the event that occurred, and that's another issue. And it's just interesting. But essentially, what did come from Justice Blue's So the Supreme Court judge, Justice Blue's judgment was, oh, by the way, I didn't get to even be part of the video link for that or be part of any correspondence. We only found out less than 24 hours before that the judgment was even being passed down. So that's another issue about how we're being disrespected. But yeah, essentially, so he's ruled to keep the coroner on the case. However, proceeding, like moving forward, it will be a case-by-case basis if corrections officers can actually apply for the penalty privilege. So essentially they will have to show up physically. They do have to answer questions, but essentially the way it will go is they will start, if they choose to plead the penalty privilege against self-incrimination, it will then stop. Things will have to be looked into, and then they'll proceed by question. So the definitions around what those questions may or may not include, what they are allowed to include, all of that information is still yet to be discussed. So while we did, I don't like the word win because you don't really win a case like this.
We can't bring him back. Yep.
No, but while we did get the coroner to stay, and at the end of the day, I don't know what her judgments will be. I trust that she's a just coroner and that she'll do what is right, and I can only trust that, right? Like I don't trust the system, but that's my hope for this case, and I'll keep that hope till it's changed if it is. But essentially, the fact that she's kept on at this stage is good for us with all the evidence that's been given so far. However,
precisely because basically, Latoya, what I'm trying to say here is not so much that she won the case. I meant that she won the right. Do you know what I mean? To proceed with the inquest, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
To be clear, because we have to win the right to proceed, and I'm hoping that happens soon. There's no date set, is there yet?
No, that's the other thing. Again, we have to wait for the corrections to come back with their submissions, and then we'll get directions hearings, and I'll know, and I'll be able to let everybody know as well.
Thank you,
because
Latoya.
It's really important, I guess, up to this date, particularly for South Australia. I haven't necessarily called a bunch of people to attend. For the Supreme Court, we did have a bunch, which was excellent, but for these 7, the people who spent the final moments with my brother in that van with no CCTV when he was pulled out, essentially dead, unconscious, those 7 need to see our faces. They need to see the community's faces. They need to be accountable. And so, I do need people to be down there during that time.
Let's talk again when a date's set, Latoya, and I'm hoping it's not going to be next year, and that we actually speak about that. And I suppose, really, because we haven't got much longer, because I'm going to be speaking with Tessa soon about Mr. Kennedy, who was very unfairly arrested in Victoria recently.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that the guards are held accountable, because a lot of them didn't write incident reports, and a lot of them were lied and said that they had gone home when the investigators actually tried to bring them out as witnesses. So a lot of stuff here, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We know that some corrections officers actually went home and got drunk, and when investigators showed up to their home, they were essentially disintoxicated. Some didn't seize their clothing or material. Things were cleaned. Prison vans were still in use, so evidence was in use. And I've actually sat in the prison van where that happened to Wayne, and I've, seen it, and actually changed multiple things inside the prison van already immediately following his passing. So, there's so much tampering with this case, yet they want to say that the only thing in this case that has been tampered with is the bias argument. I mean,
I know.
We can absolutely throw everything back on them. And that's something that we will do in time.
Yeah.
There's so much. It's going to be part of, and it will continue as part of my life's work from now. I know that, and I'm dedicated to making that an issue, and making sure that globally, these issues continue to be recognised for the state that Australia is.
Absolutely. Latoya, thank you so much for coming onto the program, and it's good that we're able to talk about this in detail, and I'm hoping that we can have a chat to you again before the inquest resumes.
Absolutely. Thank you again for having me, and love to all of you and all my love and safety as well. Hey, thank you of everybody right now.
Good on you, Latoya. No. Any final comments before you go?
Yes. Actually, at the moment, there are a bunch of us, particularly who are prison abolitionists, but also as well families of people who have died in custody or who are currently in custody who are Aboriginal. And we've put together a COVID-19 response called #CleanOutPrisons. And so if people see that around, if they can please take a photo with them holding some soap or some hand sanitizer, essentially, with the #CleanOutPrisons, and also send that to the prisons as, people inside are not receiving the appropriate health care that they need right now to stay safe. And we know that cases have arisen in places like Queensland, and everybody's at risk. So, people are able to do that. That would help us so much and help people inside to know that they've got people out here who care about them. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Is that on Facebook?
Yep, on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, #CleanOutPrisons. You'll see what to do there.
#CleanOutPrisons. Okay.
Make it go viral.
Absolutely. All right, Latoya, keep up the good work, and let's have justice for Wayne and all Aboriginal deaths in custody, and indeed all deaths in custody.
Yeah, agreed. All right, Take care.
Take care.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
What we're dealing with here is a total lack of respect for the law.
Tune in to Done by Law.
An informal and irreverent look at the law. Critical insights and analysis from diverse community perspectives.
Done by Law, 6 p.m. Tuesdays.
An important message from the Victorian Government about coronavirus. To manage coronavirus and save lives, immediate action is required. This means if you can stay home, you must stay home. Yes, it's a major disruption to your lives, but this disruption today will save the lives of many Victorians tomorrow. If you think you may have coronavirus, call the government's hotline on 1800 675 398 or visit coronavirus.vic.gov.au. Victorian Government, managing this together.
A 3CR supporter.
And you're back with the Doing Time show. And we're going to be speaking with Tessa shortly. Tessa, my apologies. I was actually reporting on an inquest of Wayne Fella Morrison, Aboriginal deaths in custody, and we were actually getting into some quite complicated evidence there. So we needed to actually wrap that up. So sorry about that. But just
that's no problem.
Oh, thank you so much for your understanding. But introducing you very briefly, I did give a very brief introduction at the beginning, that Tessa is a criminal lawyer, and she's a criminal defence lawyer, actually, and she's experienced in representing people from a wide variety of backgrounds and has particular skills in representing Indigenous people, and she's been involved with the Koori Court as well, which is what desperately needed. And we're going to be talking about Mr. Kennedy today and looking at systemic racism and also looking at the problems of homelessness and also how vulnerable Aboriginal people are when they're in custody, in particular with COVID-19 being a hazard as well. Welcome to the program, Tessa.
Thanks for having me, Marisa.
Yeah, great. So can you talk about what's been going on with Mr. Kennedy and discuss some of the concerns there?
So for your listeners who might not know about his case, Mr Kennedy had been bailed by police to attend Melbourne Magistrates Court in relation to some fairly minor offences. They were largely charges of shop theft. Given COVID-19 situation, the courts have issued a practice direction saying that anybody who's been charged to appear on bail or summons is not required to attend court, and their cases will be adjourned administratively. So in relation to Mr Kennedy's case, my office had emailed the court and confirmed that he wasn't required to attend, and the court had emailed us back and said that's right, because he's not in custody, he won't be required to come to court. What transpired was that the police prosecutor stood up in court that day and sought a warrant for Mr Kennedy in direct contravention of the practice direction. And unfortunately, the magistrate agreed and granted that application and issued warrants for his arrest. The following day, he was found by police. He was actually asleep on a bench in Collingwood, and the police issued him with a fine, a COVID-19 fine for not being home, despite the fact that he had homelessness issues. And then when they looked on their system, they saw that these warrants had been issued by the court, and so they arrested him. What then took place was a series of egregious acts by the police. That's the only way I can explain them. So Mr Kennedy was presented before the magistrates court in an after-hours hearing because it was the weekend by this stage. Police opposed his application for bail, and he in fact represented himself before the court on the weekend. I was then advised on the Monday that he'd been remanded in custody, bail refused, and I urgently sought a listing before the court for another application for bail. Again, the police opposed his application for bail, and this time the magistrate didn't make a decision on bail and remanded him in custody for a further 12 days. And I was so angry and outraged at this point that same day I filed an application in the Supreme Court. That's a really important right that people have. If bail is refused by the lower courts, they can appeal to the Supreme Court, and that's exactly what we did. The Supreme Court was so concerned by the situation that they responded to me the same day, and we had a hearing date 4 days later in the Supreme Court. And interestingly, once we got to the Supreme Court, the police had done a complete backflip on their decision, and they advised the court they were no longer opposed to Mr Kennedy being granted bail, and in fact the Supreme Court granted him bail there.
This is really quite a grave concern, isn't there? What are the underlying issues here, do you think, Tessa?
I think at the heart of all of this is the way Victoria Police treat Indigenous people. So it's so outrageous that they took the steps that they did, and it all started when they actively sought a warrant that day in court rather than allowing his matters to be adjourned the way they are for everybody else. So my concern is that the racism that is so endemic in Victoria Police is then applied when they have discretionary powers. So police prosecutors don't have to seek warrants. That's a matter that's in the prosecutor's mind that day when they stand up and appear in court. They have that discretion. And for all the other people going before court, they don't seek warrants. Again, they have a discretion about whether they oppose bail or not. They were made aware of Mr Kennedy's situation, and by the time of the second bail application in the magistrates court, they were made aware that the warrant should have never been issued, yet they continued to oppose bail.
That's crazy.
Well, sadly, it's not unusual. As a criminal lawyer representing mostly Indigenous people, I see this type of racism from Victoria Police on a daily basis.
So basically, what you're saying is that they shouldn't have issued the warrant.
No, they never should have issued that warrant. They never should have sought that warrant in the first place. But once they had, as I said, they continued to act with maximum prejudice against Mr Kennedy by opposing his further applications for bail.
What could have been some alternatives for Mr Kennedy?
Once the warrant had been issued and the police had realised their error, they could have stood up in court and said, we realise that we should not have sought this warrant and we're no longer opposed to bail. These are minor offences. Mr Kennedy does not pose a risk to the safety and welfare of the community. We consent to him being granted bail.
Yeah, because that's right. And then he didn't have to appear in court either because of the coronavirus.
That's right. The other thing to think about is because of the coronavirus, there are huge delays within the justice system. So that's something that the police ought to be taking into account in terms of the impact it has on people, knowing that if they oppose bail for a person and they're remanded in custody, the delays could be extreme and would far outweigh the prison time that someone would ordinarily serve for such minor offences.
They are indeed minor offences, and there really needs to be innovative and culturally appropriate programs to help Indigenous people.
There should be. And for offences like shop theft, my belief is that nobody should serve a prison sentence for an offence like that. No. These are low-level thefts that are committed against very large corporate shops who have insurance, and the offences are committed by people who are in circumstances of extreme poverty, people like Mr Kennedy who are experiencing the effects of intergenerational trauma and genocidal policies that we've had in this country for over 200 years. And I think as a society we need to have some understanding about the underlying cause behind these low-level offences and act compassionately rather than punitively when we respond to them.
Where is Mr Kennedy now and what's being done for him and what's happening legally with his case?
So he was bailed to live with his mother in Marisa, and one of the supports we were able to put in place is through Rumiak, which is an Aboriginal organisation in Shepparton, and they're providing support to him through their drug and alcohol counselling and medical services. So they're a very useful and important organisation in northern Victoria, and he was able to return home to the support of his family where he should be, and he was able to receive culturally appropriate support through an Aboriginal organisation. And they're the types of things that we should be looking at for people like Mr Kennedy rather than continuing to incarcerate them.
But those things only happened after you represented him.
That's right. So the court and police immediately respond with punishment, and that's part of the problem, and that's why we have severe overrepresentation of Indigenous people in custody, is because the system only looks at one side of the equation, and that is you're a person who's been charged with stealing something or whatever the charge is. They don't look at the person as a whole person, and they also don't look at the impact that invasion has had upon that person, that genocidal policies and stolen generations and stolen wages, the impact that the non-Indigenous community needs to acknowledge they have had a role in contributing to this person's situation today. But instead, the system immediately turns to punishment, and the most severe form of punishment is taking away a person's liberty, and that's why we see so many Indigenous people trapped in the prison system.
And it's actually worse now because of the fact that there's been widespread criticism of both Victorian police and New South Wales police for the lack of transparency about what constitutes an infringement. And I suppose what I'm trying to say here is that with COVID-19, how's a person supposed to stay home if they haven't got a home?
Well, that's exactly right, Marisa. So, again, when there's discretion given to Victoria Police, what we see is they don't exercise their discretion compassionately or humanely. So coming across a person who is homeless, the police should be looking at how can we assist them in housing rather than, well, let's just remand him in custody. That's the police solution for a homeless person.
Would it be fair to say that all of these issues in regards to Mr Kennedy contravenes the recommendations of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody?
It clearly does. And the government hasn't implemented the recommendations of the Royal Commission, and that's why we see the statistics continuing to worsen. Perhaps it's time for another Royal Commission, given that it's so many years down the road and we're seeing these problems are in fact getting worse. We're continuing to see deaths in custody. Mr Kennedy's own sister is tragically a case of a death in custody that's still going to have to be investigated. The situation is not improving for First Nations people. We're going backwards.
Absolutely. And not only are we going backwards, but, there have been so many reports of this. You've got Auntie Tanya Day, who was thrown into a police cell instead of, being looked after when she was
right.
intoxicated.
And again,
drunkenness should be a public health issue. Go on.
Yes, well, that's absolutely right. And again, the police have a discretion about arresting someone for being drunk in a public place. And what we know is that when they come across Indigenous people who they suspect are affected by alcohol, rather than again taking a humane approach and seeing how they can perhaps medically assist that person or assisting them in getting home to a safe environment with family, the police take the maximum prejudice option, which is arresting that person, taking them into custody, a person who's vulnerable due to their Aboriginality as soon as they're placed in custody, and then a series of very unfortunate things that happened to Miss Day. We know that every Aboriginal person that's taken in custody is a potential disaster, yet the police continue to act in this prejudicial way.
Of particular concern too is I'd love to know what actually happened to Mr Kennedy when he was in remand, how he was treated. I mean, he could have died in custody. He's vulnerable.
He's absolutely vulnerable, and I can tell you, Marisa, that I was unable to speak to him because he was quarantined. So at the moment, people going into the custodial system are placed in solitary confinement for 14 days, and that includes denying them access to speak to their lawyer. The only way I could communicate with Mr Kennedy was through speaking with a prison officer and asking the prison officer to speak to him through the little flap in the wall of his solitary confinement cell. Now, we know that placing a person in solitary confinement is a form of torture, yet this is what is happening to people who are being taken into custody now. It's state-sanctioned torture by placing that person into this quarantine system.
So placing somebody into a quarantine system should not be including blocking them from phone calls, and in particular with a lawyer. How can one get coronavirus over a telephone?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would suggest that they can't, but the staff in the prisons don't want to take people out of their cells so they can have access to their lawyers and to legal advice. They're denied contact with their family members, and particularly for Indigenous people and for someone like Mr Kennedy who's experiencing the grief and loss of his own sister in a custodial setting. He was left alone in a cell for 14 days until he was granted bail at the Supreme Court. So that experience for him was one of unnecessary and inhumane treatment. And had the police done the right thing from the start, he would not have been subjected to that treatment.
Are they still planning to have the criminal charges against him?
Yes, so those charges are still listed. Fortunately, Mr Kennedy's been bailed on those charges, but now there'll be an indefinite period of time while we wait for the police to provide evidence in relation to those charges and to see how they'll proceed.
I hope he doesn't go to prison. I mean, this is 1788 all over again. You're right, we're going backwards. And in fact, the social distancing measures when prisoners are in general population, how can you can't. Guards can't practice social distancing measures with all the strip searches and the other procedures?
No, they can't. And there's a real risk that one of the staff in the prisons will inadvertently bring the coronavirus into the prison, and then we know we will have a health disaster on our hands. And also, Indigenous prisoners are going to be particularly vulnerable to this disease. That's what all the health advice is. so it's potentially a major health disaster.
It is total hypocrisy, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done, legal work and advocacy, and we should continue this discussion. We've got about 3 minutes left of our show, but just to let listeners know that Veronica Nelson is Mr. Kennedy's sister, as Tessa said, and Veronica Nelson Walker has been on a community corrections order when she was arrested for shoplifting, and we were talking about those offences before, that really people shouldn't be going to prison for that. She was withdrawing from drugs at the time, and now she's dead. She actually died in custody in January and wasn't helped. Any final comments, Tessa, before we finish?
I would just really encourage people, if they find themselves charged with a criminal matter, to seek representation. I think now more than ever it's very important that particularly First Nations people have strong advocates fighting for them in their corner, because the system is weighted so heavily against vulnerable people that the only defence that we have are strong and fearless defence lawyers. So if anyone has come into contact with police and are needing to go to court, I would just really encourage them to make sure they get a very good defence lawyer in their corner.
Thanks so much, Tessa. Thanks so much for coming onto the program.
Thank you for having me, Marisa.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye. And that was Tessa speaking about Mr. Kennedy and some of the genocidal policies that are happening, and indeed also as a result of the coronavirus as well with the measures. It's approximately, 4:57, and I'll be out of here very soon. Beyond Zero is coming up next, and we'll be going on with our theme song, Black Fella, White Fella. Tune in for the Doing Time show every Monday from 4 to 5 p.m. Goodbye and stay safe. Take care of each other.
As long as you are true fella, as long as you are real fella. All the people of different races with different lives in different places, it doesn't matter what your name is, we got to have lots of changes. We need more brothers if we're to make it, we need more sisters if we're to save it. Are you the one who's gonna stand up and be counted? Are you the one who's gonna be there when we shout it? Are you the one who's always ready with a helping hand? Are you the one who understands this family plan? Black fella, white fella, yellow fella, any fella, it doesn't matter what you color, as long as you are true fella. All the people of different races with different lives in different places, it doesn't matter which religions, it's all the same where the ship is sinking. We need more brothers if we're to make it, we need more sisters if we're to save it. Are you the one who's gonna stand up and be counted? Are you the one who's gonna be there when we shout it? Are you the one who's always ready with a helping hand? Are you the one who understands this family plan?
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.